William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.
Hi everyone, my name is Ana Rushi. I'm speaking from Brazil, and that's our translation panel today. We are here to talk about Please Get This Book Closer to Your Language, a translator's roundtable to find out which book to translate next. We do have amazing translators here. Chiara Cigarini from Italy, Diego Cepeda from Colombia, Emily Jing from China, and thanks for making the time for being with us so late. Iana from Brazil, and I will be your host. In replacement of Fábio Fernandes, he wasn't able to join us because internet issues. So I would like to invite you to present yourselves, and our first guest to talk will be Chiara. Please,
Yes.
Ciao, Chiara.
Ciao a tutti. So my name is Chiara Cigarini. I got a PhD from Beijing Normal University, and I'm currently an adjunct professor at the Ca' Foscari University of Venice. So I started doing research focusing on contemporary Chinese science fiction since my undergraduate courses at my university in Italy, and yeah, that's my background.
Yeah, okay, amazing. We do have amazing translators here today, everybody. So Diego, please, and hi from everybody who's introducing themselves in the chat as well. Hola Diego, ¿cómo estás?
Hola, ¿cómo están? So sorry if my English is a little rusty. Let's see. I've been a translator for around 4 years, I think. I actually started because I was reading bizarro fiction, which is like a really small subgenre in the United States, and I wanted to translate it and bring it to Colombia. But I ended up becoming a Portuguese translator. I started with poetry, and I've translated a couple books, novels, and even more poetry books right now. So it's such an honor to be with you guys right now, and I'm really happy about it.
Now the honor is all ours, and thank you for translating Portuguese such inspiring books, because I know your work. Thank you for doing this. Emily, please have the floor.
Hi, I'm Emily Jin, speaking from China. So right now we're 11 p.m. and it's great to see all of you. So I translate from Chinese into English and the other way around. And I'm currently pursuing a PhD degree in East Asian languages and literature at Yale University. So kind of doing academia is my second life. And that in translation kind of goes on kind of interchangeably at times, because I also study contemporary Chinese science fiction like Chiara. I also am leaning more and more towards cognitive linguistics and translation. So that's been my recent interest. And I can also see how that's been influencing my work as well. So it's been an interesting journey. So yeah, it's great to be here and happy to see you all virtually.
Okay, thanks again. And Iana, please, tudo bom?
Tudo bem. Hi, guys. My name is Iana. I am from Brazil. I am a translator and an editor at Eita Magazine. We translate Brazilian authors into English. So I do, at the moment, I'm doing mostly Portuguese to English translations, but I also do English to Portuguese. These are my two languages. I also work with another Brazilian zine that publishes historical fiction. So very different from sci-fi or fantasy, but I love it. And I've been shortlisted for the Rosetta Awards for translated fiction in the short form category, which was such a huge honor because that piece that was shortlisted is actually my first like published translation. So it was like very huge honor.
Thank you very much for the introductions, everybody. Our first question will be like our icebreaker. It will be, why did it start translating? Why did it's like, because translating is hard. Nobody credits the translators every time. So it's a very, we do have so much to learn, so much to do. You can make mistakes, like it's part of the job. So Chiara, could you begin our round?
Sure. Well, I started translating. Why? It's because when I was studying at university, I've chosen a course focused on translation and interpreting. And at that time, I had to pick up a topic for my dissertation, and I bumped into contemporary Chinese science fiction. So I've chosen an author and a short story for my for my master dissertation, and then I kind of I fall in love with Chinese science fiction. So I kept doing that. So that's my that was my start, and then I started doing some collaboration with Future Fiction and Francesco, and that's the story.
Thank you, Diego.
My beginning was in college too. I actually started doing a translating course, which was well, it was with a local professor from here. And my very first story that I translated was Carlton Melik's Hammer Wives, which I really loved. I tried to get it published, and no one wanted to do it, which was the reason that, or one of the reasons that I started Ediciones Vestigio, because I am an editor too. So that's the way I started translating from English, and from Portuguese. It was because I've been working for around 5 years with Jerónimo Pizarro. Jerónimo is an expert in Portuguese contemporary literature, and especially Fernando Pessoa. And the very first project he came to me with was trying to translate Pessoa's Book of Proverbs, which he had compiled before the World War, trying to win some money and print it in the UK. And well, it was a really long project that was, I think it was published around a couple years ago, but that was the way I started also translating Portuguese. And yeah, that's how I've been working. I've been working freelance work for around some time. I translate a couple books for Planeta, and I've been working for personal projects right now.
Excellent. Emily, could you share your thoughts with us?
So I guess the way I got into translating science fiction, especially, the story came in two parts. So part one is that as a child, I practically read too much, and that's how I kind of got into the dark hole of Chinese science fiction as a small child, and kind of just bought into all of that. So it's cool because I am now working with a lot of the authors who I've really just read growing up and I admired a lot growing up. So that's been really cool for me as a fan, to be actually working with them and promoting their works, to a broader international audience, or more like preaching, really. On the other hand, as a high schooler, I used internet too much, and that's how I stumbled upon the magic of subtitling. So I basically joined this subtitled TV show group to translate shows in English into Chinese for a Chinese audience, and we just kind of publish the subtitles, just the subtitles online, so they can kind of pair it with their movies and to see the show for themselves. So I was involved in a group like that for a very long time. Then eventually, after I graduated from college, that was also, well, the time when I was graduating, that was when the three body problem, so currently the most famous piece of Chinese science fiction, that unexpectedly won the Hugo Awards, and that's how translated Chinese science fiction became a thing in itself. So that really inspired me, and also I have to mention with honor here that Ken Liu, who has been my mentor when I first joined the community, he was the one who introduced to me this great like sea of opportunities and told me that translating science fiction is a thing that can be done, that is cool, and actually supervised a few of my first projects. So he really got me going and took me under his wing. So that kind of all came together, and here I am right now.
Wow, great. We can talk a little about later about like subtitles and also fanfic writing. It helps very much young people to become translators, and that's a very important role. Yes. Yes. Yana, please, could you share your thoughts with us?
So that's a great segue. I started translating when I was a teenager on a little website called fanfiction.net. And it was obviously fanfic, like Harry Potter and X-Files, the X-Files fanfic. And I started like just asking the authors if I could translate them to Portuguese, and don't look that up, okay? That was a long time ago. I've improved a lot. I also, at the time, I was also translating fanfiction from Spanish to Portuguese, but I lost that skill. I can't do that anymore. And then there's a huge gap where I go to school and I study history, so I didn't really like kept up with translating, just a little bit, but I started teaching English, so I was always in contact with the language, and I also read maybe too much and a lot in English. So it was only like after college that I took an interpreter's course, and I started interpreting, simultaneous interpretation, and there's a lot of like stuff that they use for trainings or workshops, and I started translating the documents as well, not only interpreting but also translating what they needed. And then I was like, I really like this. I really love this. Like, there's no comparison. I love teaching, but I loved translating. So I started looking for courses on translation. I didn't have like the heart to go back to school and study 4 years of college. And I was like, no, there's gotta be another way. And then I took a few courses, and that was like back in 2018, I guess. So it's very recent, actually. And then from there, I was like, what do I love? I love books. I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I want to work with this. And I started to get into the community, reading Brazilian authors, reading international authors through some of our Strange Horizons, etc. And then I really started to get into it. And when Strange Horizons had a open call for submissions from Brazilian writers, it was then that I really got into like this specific science fiction, fantasy subgenre, because a lot of Brazilian authors were trying were sending their submissions, but they didn't write in English. So I was translating for them. And really that's like how it all started. And now I'm here. We created with a couple of friends Eita Magazine to continue this work of translating Brazilian authors into English. And here we are.
Yeah, thanks.
So not academic at all. I think I am like the black sheep here, but there you have it, fanfic.
There is no wrong or right in this kind of issue, no. So we are so glad that you are here with us. Personally, I translate only a little, but I do translations when I need a piece like to teach, because I'm a teacher and I teach science fiction. And for example, I translated the short story from the Mexican Gabriela Dan Miravete from Spanish into Portuguese, because it's a beautiful short story and I really like to use them in classes. And it's done it's published in Mafagafo, a very good magazine that we have here in Brazil. But let's jump in our second question. What do you think? Which book that you always wanted to bring to your language? And the opposite way, which book from your language you love to see translated? And think that we have already an audience from different parts of the world. So that would be a very good tip for editors that are watching us already. So jump in.
Well, I think that the book that I really wanted in Portuguese, I myself couldn't translate because it was Japanese. I don't translate from Japanese. I don't read Japanese. Like, all I do is watch Studio Ghibli and that's it. So, but lucky for me, as just a few months after I discovered this book, it's The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. Let me write here on the chat. They had a translation from The Memory Police published in Brazil like this year, in April, I guess, so not long ago. And I was so happy because I feel like this is the kind of book like that everyone should read. Doesn't matter if you like to read or not, read The Memory Police, okay? And, well, there are many authors that I would like to translate to English or to really to have them be read in any other language, but I think a favorite of mine is As Noites Marcianas, okay, by a Brazilian author that is Fausto Cunha. And I don't know when this is gonna happen. He's not alive anymore. I don't know who has the rights to his books. So, but the translation of the title would be The Martian Nights. It's a short story collection that I really love. And I think there's like just so much good stuff in his writing. And then also Os Filhos de Asher. Now going to a more recent publication, Os Filhos de Asher by Isabor Quintieri. She published, I think it was this year or last year. Like it really is very recent. It's a short story or a novelette. Like it's not very long. And we actually published a short story by Isabor in our first issue of Eita Magazine. And this is another one by her that is very good, very excellent. It deals with moral questions and time travel. And it's not your repetitive, simple, let's kill Hitler and done, you know? So there's so much more to it. And well, I could keep going, so I'm gonna stop here. I already said,
Okay.
I already mentioned 3 books.
And thanks for the help. Type in here the title. This is Portuguese I can handle. Let's see if other titles and name of authors. So who's next?
I can go. So
Go ahead.
um, I'll do the second part of the question first. Which books from my language? And I think that my answer would be specifically from Colombian sci-fi. I'm thinking specifically of, I don't know, authors like Luis Carlos Barragan or Karen Andrea Reyes. Oh, I can write. And Hank T. Cohen, because I think that there's a thing in Colombian science fiction, which is that even though there's really great books, most of them haven't been translated. Well, because of a number of reasons. For example, I know Luis Carlos has tried be to speak with different translators, um, and the thing is, for example, he's too Colombian, so he uses a lot of jargon in his books, and trying to bring that to another language or even to another country is difficult. So yeah, that's one. I'll write the recommendations. And there's a couple books that I've always wanted to have in Spanish. Um, the first one because I first read about it in a blog of Brazilian sci-fi, which is Fausto Fawcett's Santa Clara Poltergeist. But because I hadn't read about it, I actually got the book like a couple weeks ago, I think, along with Básico Instinto. And they're really great books with cyberpunk, and I think that a really great flavor of Portuguese, of Brazilian science fiction. So that's one. And the other is one of the books from Yasuka Tsutsui, the writer of Paprika, because I really really love the what he's writing. And Yusuke. No, okay, I'm out. I think it's Yasuka, and he's a really great artist and writer, and he's published like 40 different books in Japanese. And right now in Spanish, I think that there's only translated of 2 of his books, which is precisely Paprika and Hombre Salmonella del Planeta Porno. But yeah, I think that I would really love to see more of his work translated, especially because he's such a huge part of uh, of Japanese weird and science fiction. So yeah, those are like my recommendations right now.
Wow, thank you very much. I think in the end of this conversation, we will have like a list of names and authorships. Chiara or Emily?
Yeah, for me, it's not only about which novel or short story should be translated into Italian, but it's also about which author, because as I mentioned before, I approached Chinese science fiction thanks to an author in particular, Han Song. And I think it's really strange because he's one of the 2 generals of Chinese science fiction. Is he played a big part for the genre nativization, and I've always hoped to bring his short stories and novels into Italian, although I can understand why his works can be considered as a bit I don't know, controversial from a political point of view, or for some content that can be considered as disturbing. But I think his works are wonderful. So, for example, Subway, 地铁 in Chinese, or Mars Shines Over America, 火星照耀美国, are just two of his very famous novels that I think are wonderful, not just because they depict the monsters produced by the Chinese modernization process, but also because he kind of talk to us about our about humanity in general and humanity's relationship with technology in general. So that's why it's not just about. I think it's wrong to consider his novel as just a political weapon, or as a I don't know, consider science fiction in general as only as a tool for soft power. It's more complicated than that, and I think Han Song really deserves to be translated, because he really can give us can let us feel this complexity, and so that's the author, and those are the two novels that I hope will be translated soon. Also, together with Red Ocean, another very important novel. And as for the Italian part, which Italian book I hope will be translated into other languages, I hope that since many of Italian mainstream work have already been translated into other languages, I think about Eco Calvino and other amazing writers. I think that there are many female Italian science fiction writers that deserve to be translated, such as Clelia Farris or Nicoletta Vallorani. So that's my recommendation.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for the help, guys, here on the chat, helping with searching names on the web. Emily, please.
Hi, I'm actually pretty glad that I got to speak class, because my response is somewhat different from everyone else's. And of course, I really enjoyed the huge list of book recs here. But I think I'm just going to go in a direction that kind of stays away from talking about specific books, etc. And so first of all, I think I'll take the first part of the question and say it in a more kind of, I would say, I'll throw out the first kind of controversial bomb of the night, if that makes sense. And I know Francesco somewhere out there watching, and you might agree. So I think in general, I think it's less about what kind of books I want to see more in my language, I guess now using Chinese as the language I represent here. I just want to say that I want to see less books from English being translated in Chinese in general. And I say this because I feel like me and my generation, we grew up in this environment that's so overly saturated with English literature and also pop culture. And that's really just a lot of the things that people are watching and absorbing while growing up. So in contrast to that, I feel like other languages being translated into Chinese is just in general very under-translated. And we also lack translators who can do that kind of work. And the other thing is that when I read translated works from languages I don't know, such as a lot of European languages, or even Japanese, or even Korean, countries that are supposedly closer to China geographically, a lot of them actually come from, let's say you translate Japanese into English, and then someone who can do English to Chinese translations take the English version and translate it kind of second-handedly. And I think in general, I just want to see more direct translations from languages that are not English into Chinese. So that's my big hope here. And of course, I really appreciate FutureCon, because this is what exactly this convention is promoting, and that's all great. And the second part of the question is, I think instead of kind of advertising a specific work, and I know that Chiara has always been a huge Han Song fan since I've known her. So Han Song was great, I agree. But in general, I want to say that the one thing I want to see translated into other languages more is actually just the entire system of Chinese mythology, which comes up a lot in Chinese fantasy, which is kind of Chinese science fiction's dark side sister in a way that people don't really talk about. So definitely that's one thing I want to see translated more. And it's great that more and more contemporary authors are alluding actively to Chinese mythology, Chinese tradition, history in their works. So that's really giving these texts a second chance of coming to life and giving us translators a way to try out with those classical texts and see how we render them in a more contemporary setting. So that's one thing I am currently working on personally. And definitely, I want to see more translators getting involved and engaged, and also editors who are interested in subjects featuring a lot of those stuff, trying to bring this to life instead of everyone kind of zooming in on what they see as the very mainstream kind of contemporary Chinese science fiction, which is all about, oh, like futurism, etc., etc. So that's kind of the two large and broad answers I will give, and I will leave notebook Rex for now.
No, that was a very complete answer, Emily. Thanks for sharing this all. And I will pick your hook to jump in our next question, because English is sort of a hub for all the science fiction world, right? Like everybody like goes into English to be known in other countries, and it's very complicated, especially when we are speaking about South America, because like Portuguese and Spanish are easily to understand, and but we need like the, I don't know, the English stamp to make this kind of, I don't know, to make this kind of traffic and weight to spread news stories. And I would ask you about which science fiction magazines or publish houses, we know Francesco is here for future fiction, that make a huge project in spreading stories from non-Anglo fiction stories. So could you also name projects, things that you like to be more often?
Well, there are magazines like Constellation that it doesn't not only publishes in English, but it's bilingual, so publishes also in Spanish. I think that's a great format. They, of course, it's not exclusive, but they're publishing a lot of Latin American authors in both languages. So there is that. I think, and they are brand new. Like the first issue was published last year, 2020. Yeah. So I think it's a little light to show zines that we can do something like this. We can have more bilingual zines and whatnot. We also have some of our guys, I'm going to pronounce this the way I pronounce it because I've never heard anyone speaking that word, so bear with me. Some of our accepts any languages as long as you have like an English translation. So you have paired the original language and the English translation. And there's also ETA magazine that I'm editing. We are going to publish our first bilingual issue this year, at the end of this year, and it has a lot to do with watching projects like Constellation and some of our working that were like, well, we were only publishing in English. Why don't we just publish in Portuguese? And Brazilian readers can also enjoy it. You know, I think you have more readers when you have more languages involved. Most of the world doesn't speak English. I think English is just like a road, it's not a destination like we talked about. So enjoy the road, use whatever you can, but you have to think bigger than that, I believe. There is also, again, I've never heard the word, this magazine name pronounced, so bear with my pronunciation. There's also Corel magazine that publishes just immigrant writers and diaspora authors. So it's very specific about the type of voices they are amplifying. So you are necessarily gonna have other stories, other perspectives, other languages, bilingual, trilingual people publishing and sharing their points of view on Coreo. And I think that's my main points, my main suggestions. I really love short stories. I really love like magazines. So I'm very passionate about it. I was just like thinking that I recommended, the only novel I recommended was Yoko Ogawa's As Noites Marcianas by Fausto Cunha. Are short stories. Os Filhos de Asher by Isabor Quintieri. It's a short story, so that's my thing, you know.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, we will have the next panel will be about magazines, and it's good because this discussion is related. It's like a warm-up discussion from the next panel. That will be great because we are adding something new.
That I will be watching.
The same, the same. Who's want to?
I can.
Go ahead, Diego.
I know about and I know about it because an author of ours was published there about the. It's a series of anthologies that. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce her name, so I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. I think it's Margaret Elga Dottir. She's a Norwegian writer, and she's been doing a series of table books. I think that it started with Africa and it's moved right now. She's publishing American Monsters. She's published 2 different tomes right now. So, for example, I know she has stories by, I know, Ramiro Sanchez, and she also has stories by Chilean authors. And, well, it's like a really, really long list of different authors. Which I think that it's a really great project, and it's a project that's been translating different languages into English. So it's really good. Well, precisely because of the bridge that you were speaking about, Anna. I'll write recommendations after a while. But I've also been checking out that there's. I think that small presses are beginning to publish different languages right now. It's a really big risk for us because most people actually want to read English fiction and Anglo fiction. But for example, well, this is like a little self promotion, but we've in Ediciones Vestigio we're starting to publish Portuguese science fiction and, well, in general, Portuguese fiction. Right now, we're translating Raul Brandau's Humus, which is like such an important book for contemporary fiction in Portugal. And I know, for example, here in Colombia, there's a small press that's named Tanuki. Those guys are publishing Japanese fiction right now. Well, it's really difficult because most of their work, they don't have any translators in here, or any good translators rather. So, for example, it's difficult because they're tasked with finding a government grant from Japan, and then finding out a good Japanese translator. And I know there's like a couple. Oh, Francesco has been working really hard to bring non-English science fiction into his work. And yeah, I think that, those are like my first questions right now, my first answers. But if I think of anything, I'll write it down for you guys to see in the YouTube chat.
Oh, thank you for such interesting thoughts. And Emily, Chiara.
Yeah, and
Yes, I
as
can.
for
Oh, go ahead.
no, you, Emily, you first.
Okay. So I think speaking of which, since we're on this conversation, I think I'll actually direct this conversation in kind of the plenitude of online forums. And since we talked about fandom and we talked about kind of those grassroots movements of translating earlier on, I just want to say that actually a lot of people I know, a lot of my friends, first came to translating stories freely on a lot of these online forums. So such as of our own, our favorite fandom site. That's one of the places where so many translations just like happen naturally. They can be of any genre, apart from fan fiction, which is what it's known for. People actually also post original stuff on it too. And I know, like for facts, that people I know who study kind of translating between Russian and Chinese, they only study the language, but they are really kind of harboring that skill because they want to translate fan fiction first, and then that gradually evolve into a more serious translation project, if I could say. And so I think that's actually where a lot of, especially younger generation people, especially students in colleges, in language colleges, are trying out their hand in this work, this art of translation. So I just want to say that apart from magazines and fanzines and all these effort that we kind of people in the science fiction industry have come to know already, I think the internet is definitely a place where a lot of the new ideas and the new trends and movements are happening. And that's also a place where people are actively paying a lot more attention to fiction written beyond the standard, oh, this is like written by fans who speak and use English. And also as a result, Archive of Our Own has expanded its language categories to include more and more language users. And so I think that's also where I see becoming this a lot more internationally based hub, where translators and writers come together. So I just want to like kudos to internet fiction.
Yes, that's it. That's it. Chiara, please.
As for me, I think I can answer to this question again from the perspective of Chinese science fiction, because I've recently done some research on the spread of this genre in Europe, and I've noticed that before Liu Cixin won the Hugo Award, there were very few magazine and projects focused on this genre. So, for example, there was Urania, that's like an Italian publication focused on science fiction in general. They did 2 special issues on the topic. But apart from that, and Fata Morgana, another magazine, there were very few publications on the topic. Right now, besides Francesco in Italy, I found out that there are mainstream publishing houses interested in the genre, and also independent ones, such as, for example, in Italy, Ad Editore. They recently published some short stories by Hao Jinfang. And also there are, the interesting part, I think, is also that some magazines that were initially focused on just on Chinese mainstream literature in translation started now to also to focus on this genre, and so I think what I mean is that right now we can find very interesting publication from many different publishing houses genre, not just in Italy, but also, for example, in Germany, there is Kapsel, I think, that recently did an amazing work, or in France, Gentayu, if I don't know if I may have mispronounced it, and Anglemore, I think. So what I think is that although it's after Liu Cixin won the Hugo Prize, this gave a great input. So the market is helping to promote this genre right now, but is also promoting small and independent realities. So I think that's really important. And I think that those realities are spreading and are doing an amazing job. And the perfect example, I think, is Francesco. Really, notice that. That's my thought.
Thank you very much. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah. Do you like to introduce yourself, or you can do it later, whatever you feel more comfortable?
Yeah, I can do it now. I'm Rachel Cordasco. I run the website sftranslation.com, and I write a lot of reviews about speculative fiction that's been translated into English. And I have a book about it coming out in a few months. So.
That's it. Rachel Cordasco is a very important voice in translation, so we are very happy that you join us.
Thank you.
And we do have so much interesting questions from the audience. I picked two to begin, and we'll move forward. If you like to comment other questions that you are reading already in the chat, on the chat, so be our guest. The first I would like to ask is by Vanessa Guedes, a very good friend of mine. We do a podcast together with Tiago Ambrosio Lages. Vanessa is also from ETA's magazine. And her question is, how important is to be an author yourself when you work as a translators? And so the second question I picked from Steph. She's in UK and make wonderful comments in our chat already. She asking about how do you treat Creole languages in translations. So I put both questions together because they are asking about how your skills or how you do treat language when you do I don't know, challenging translations. Rachel, could you step in so we can hear a little more of you?
Yeah, I think that the being able to write, first of all, being a good reader, someone who reads a lot and who's got kind of an ear for language, you know, that's always ideal. And then when you're translating, being able to simultaneously hear what the I guess from what I do, what the literal translation is, and then what sounds right in your target language. So, you know, it might sound kind of a little like it's right, the translation's correct, but it doesn't exactly sound, I guess, natural, for instance, in English. You know, I translate from Italian, and it's pretty close. The rhythm is pretty close, but sometimes the word is just not quite what people would say in English normally. And so, you know, you have to be able to be comfortable and in just kind of modifying what you're translating so that it is it's in the spirit of what you're translating, but it also reads well. Because if it doesn't read well in English, then, you know, the people who are reading it who don't know Italian, they don't care, you know, if it's like exactly right in the translation. What they want is to read a good story. And so you have to be able to, it has to sound good in English. And I think that the best way to do that is by doing a lot of writing and a lot of reading, and having a lot of different kind of sounds and styles in your head. You know, I don't write fiction myself, but I write a lot of nonfiction. And I think that actually helps a lot too. So that's kind of how I go about it.
Thank you very much. Diego Rodrigo has said that you work with this kind of skill. Could you?
Yeah, okay. So My very first translation, which we had, well, it had a couple mistakes, and we just managed to publish a second edition with, well, a lot of corrections, and it was a book, well, rather an anthology made by a Cabo Verdean author, a Portuguese anthology. His name is José Luis Tavares, and he's really good. But yeah, one of his I think political like statements that he's made, well, while he's writing, is the fact that he's mostly publishing his books both in Portuguese and in Crioulo, Caverdiano. So I remember speaking with him about it, and he said that it's really important because most of Creole languages aren't really taught right now in their countries. So the simple act of writing and publishing a Creole language is an act of preservation. So we had a couple issues with him because of um, some of his Criollo translations, or rather trying to both trying to concertate both with his Criollo part, the Criollo part of a certain poem, and a Portuguese part. But that's in poetry. I know that well, fiction has different rules. I've been working. I worked like the past couple of years in translating a Portuguese book that has a lot of parts in Creole, in Crioulo, Caverdiano também. And we had to ask, well, José Luis precisely because I don't know anything about Crioulo. It has because the way it's written is mostly phonetic, because it has no real like official way of writing itself. So we had to ask him about it because we don't really know. I worked that translation with a professor of mine, and she was constantly saying that most of Crioulo can be understood by Portuguese people and Brazilian people, but trying to read it is a different set of skills, and trying to translate it is even more difficult. So yeah, about that book, and the first question, I'm not a fiction writer. I want to be someday, but I think I agree with what Rachel was saying. It's really important to be able to read a lot, and not only read a lot, but also like being able to read outside your usual like comfort zone. I've had to read, I don't know, I was thinking about it, and for example, I've had to learn about architecture in order to translate books into Spanish, or I don't know, zoology also. Like there's a really long list of things that you end up learning about, and it's like random random facts that you can like speak about, because it's precisely the idea is to make it sound natural. So when you are trying to translate something that, for example, has architectural terms, the idea is you must try and translate it into the local like field. So yeah, I think that it's not only being a great reader, but also being able to read from different fields and trying to pick up like the different languages they manage.
Awesome, awesome. Emily, Yara, Iana, Chiara.
I can go.
Yeah.
Right. So I think just I saw this question actually pop up in the comments that also gave me some new thoughts on what I'm about to say. But first of all, I think that translation, not only that your skill as a writer influences the way you translate, but this also happens the other way around. A lot of the translators I know a lot of the writers I know who are bilingual or multilingual are gradually more and more getting into translation, because as they have discovered, and also as I have discovered personally, this is really a way for us to hone our precise attention paid to language. And by doing that, it just feels like you're a lot more aware of what you're writing, of what you're typing, of the kind of different ways you can describe this same thing and to give it very different feelings. Because we all know that, and I've always been really for this aim, this mission, is that translation should be viewed as an art and not just as some kind of a mechanical work that can be taken over easily by Google, let's say. And I mean, that's also this ongoing joke, I guess, in our whole industry about how we're all going to lose our jobs one day. But the precise reason that we're still all hanging in there, we're all working, that literary translation is still alive and being watched by so many people right now, is that translation stands on its own as a work of art. And in the act of doing that, it's not just about delivering the content, but in this case, the form is just as important as the content, because in these capsules of languages, in the kind of terms you choose, in the kind of diction you choose, that you want to represent your author with, that already kind of creates this aura for your author. And as we know, different authors have different styles, they have different personalities, and the story isn't just all about the story, but it's fundamentally a rhetorical and aesthetical decision that you're making, and that is happening in your translation. This thing, this sculpture, this painting, if you view it that way, this thing you're creating together with your writer in this process. So yes, in general, I do agree that being a writer itself helps you gain that kind of awareness towards how language is being used. And more importantly, it helps you capture different authors' vibes. That's much more easier for you to view this translation as a piece of artwork that in some ways you're taking over the writer's role when you're producing the story in a different language. You're not just kind of speaking as this emotionless machine who's delivering their concepts, delivering the gist, but you're really just essentially there as, if I can say, a secondary author to this entire world that you're creating. So I think for me, it's more of a conceptual thing that's happening when I translate with the mindset of an author.
Yeah, I would like to add something to this. Talking specifically about machine translations, that was the question, and Emily mentioned it. I have experimented with machine translation to translating fiction. I am not like completely against technology. I'm not completely against machine translation, but it's, having said that, the result you get from a machine translation translating a work of fiction is not really fiction, I guess, because when you get the translation from the machine, you have to change so much that you might as well have done it yourself, you know? Machine translation is great for maybe technical books and manuals, I don't know. But like Emily said, fiction is not only about words, it's not only this word is this. It's about subtlety and meaning and intention that a machine can't pick up yet. And we are very, very, very far away from quality machine translation for fiction. All the tools I've tried, they come off horrible, to say the least. Okay? So translators are not losing their jobs anytime soon. Even when you have, like, I have worked as a copy editing machine translations for nonfiction books, And even then, there is a lot that you have to change to make the paragraph make sense, to translate the idea, not the words, right? The intentions and everything. So I just wanted to add that, because I did try using machine translation. I will say it's nice, the structure, because using the structure of machine translation like WordFast or SmartCat, you don't miss a paragraph or a sentence, because it's all there listed, divided by lines, so you have segments. So this is nice because it guarantees that you are not gonna jump anything. This I like.
If can I add something to Iana and Emily?
Of course, yes.
I completely agree with Emily when she said that translation is like a work of art, and I think it's important to focus on the fact that translation, when you translate, you always lose something and you get something, and the one of I think a very useful strategy, I think, it's to focus on the effect. So to try to reproduce the effect that the native speaker, the native reader gets when he reads the work in the first language. So if you do that, you don't focus on the translation of the single word, but you focus on reproducing this kind of effect, and that helps you a lot to get the right perspective, I think, when you translate, and that's called dynamic equivalence, and it's one of the many other strategies that a translator can use. But of course, it's a very good one if you do literary translation, I think.
Yeah, very good answers. And thank Kelly Nenoff for the question, because it's a very interesting question. Do you guys want to add something about the machine learning translation process, or that's all?
Yeah, I actually have one thing just to add about machine translation, because that's actually been quite on my mind recently. I suspect it's gonna go into my dissertation in the future. So it's actually one of the areas I'm exploring actively right now about machine translation. I think the one thing I've noticed, I guess just as my own personal niche here, a lot is the context behind the word that it is translating. So even just if we leave out the big literary constructions out of the picture, so for example, in the Chinese language, there are often many words, adjectives that are really specific. So you would say this person is beautiful, but this beautiful refers to a very specific kind of beauty that is restrained to a certain situation, a certain age, or a certain gender. And that happens quite a lot in the Chinese language. And we have a lot of different ways of expressing different kinds of beauties. But when we plug that into a translator online, it comes out, almost all of it goes directly into beautiful, and that's it. And the one thing I've gradually picked up as a trend, at least translating Chinese into English, is that through machine translation, the contextual stuff often gets dropped out of the translation, leaving you at this very kind of like bland sentence, and it just is there. So I guess like one of my like very preliminary thoughts on if we want to work better with machines in the future is probably that can help you kind of like first put you in a kind of category, so your mind saves the work from determining what family this word, the sentence belongs to, and it's currently still up to the translators to make the embellishments and to add in the contextual stuff. But if in the future, if any engineers out there are listening, I guess like one future like idea that I have as someone who know nothing about machines but know a little about translations is that I think paying attention to grabbing on contextual words in the sentences and kind of creating this kind of linkage between them, that might really help pin down the precision. But I'm just gonna throw this out there.
So our tech guys who are watching us, take a note. That's a very good tip. And I will jump into this question by Snowflower. How challenging is for you to translate into a second language? That's a very interesting question as well. Who's gonna? I know that Emily does this, Iana does this.
You mean like from my first language to a second language, right?
That's it, yes.
Well, it is very challenging because it's another language, not only that, but these kind of subtleties of context that we were talking about, that recreating an effect that a sentence or something that a character said in another language is hard. And I mean, I can speak for myself. I have never lived outside of Brazil. I learned English reading and watching TV. So I didn't actually have like experience an Anglophone culture outside of media, you know. I know it's not the same as living in Canada or in the US or anywhere else that speaks English. So I never had this cultural proximity. But by reading incessantly and watching a lot of stuff beyond, I mean, TV that is produced by a TV producer or Warner Brothers or whatever, helps a lot. Like, it might sound funny, but YouTube creators that are in their own country talking freely without a script, they can give you ideas for like expressions and slang and affectations and meaning that other stuff that is more produced doesn't have, or is limited. Because what we see on TV is not exactly reality, right? Like, so I think paying attention to these little things is very interesting, and also having in mind that, for example, when you have a language like English that was born in a country that is cold, like England, you're gonna have a lot of words for storms and snow that we don't have in Portuguese. We have like 2 in Portuguese and that's it. So you have to remember that you're not gonna use like snow, 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 snow. You're gonna have to adapt a little bit. You have other vocabulary that you can use. And in the same way, like when you're translating from English to Portuguese, there's a lot of more words to he said in Portuguese than you have in English, from my experience. Okay, so I think really thinking about context and a little bit of adapting.
Great. Sorry to to mispronounce the name of Kelling. The machine translator question was from Kelling Stensey. Thanks, Kelly Nanoff, to clarify for me. Who's gonna step in now? About second language?
I can add something maybe. I think it's really challenging, especially if you are, for example, in my case, I'm Italian and I'm translated from the Chinese, so there is a huge geographical and cultural gap. So at least at the beginning, it was really hard. But I think this challenge also becomes the fascinating part, because you really get to explore and to make a journey into another culture when you translate. So, for example, I remember one time there was a word, "madge," and that was I couldn't understand it in the beginning, and that was a word for that stands for 马克主义哲学家. So it was like a Marxist philosopher, a figure that in the Chinese schools teaches Marxism. And of course, I have no such a figure in Italy. But the process, the fact that I had to contact a Chinese friend in order to understand what was that, and then I could figure out this whole different system, scholastic system, was really fascinating. So I think the more the challenge, the more the fascination part. So that's my thought.
So I think we could make another question that's from our script. I think it's an interesting one. Was also asked, it's from which source languages do you want to read more novels? Because Iana quoted a Japanese work before. And Rachel, if you would like to begin this round.
Sure. Yeah, I always like to find kind of SF in translation from languages that aren't very well represented. So, for instance, there was an anthology of Greek SF translation that came out recently. And I was so excited because we don't get a whole lot of that. Also because some of the major Greek authors write directly in English, so I was really excited to read some SFT from Greece and from Greek. And I've read thanks to Kaylin Nenov, I read an anthology of Bulgarian SFT. Again, we don't get a whole lot of that. But then again, there's Japanese SFT that we've had a whole lot of, but I can't seem to get enough of that because a lot of the books that I've been reading, especially the hard science fiction, I could just read all day, and so I would love more from that. But yeah, mostly I would love it to be a little more well distributed. So languages that we don't normally see, instead of a very kind of like we get a ton from like a few languages and a little bit from everybody else. So I think something like that will happen with more I guess encouragement of people to become translators and to also learn other languages. I know in the U.S., from what I can tell, it's just kind of language learning is generally not that, just not that encouraged. It's like they'll offer one language and that's it. And I think it's a huge problem. And I think that it's taking away from the education. It's contributing to insulation, and isolation. And there's no reason for it. You can just really introduce people to much more just by teaching them other languages instead of being like, well, a lot of people speak English, so what's the point? So that's what I would encourage.
Very nice indeed.
Okay. No.
Okay, Diego,
Okay.
then Iana.
Yeah, Diego, then Iana. Go.
Then Chiara, okay.
Okay, so I think that the English market is pretty different than, not only the Spanish market, but the Colombian one, because, as a country, we don't have a lot of readers. So most big publishing houses won't publish sci-fi or fantasy because it's a risk and it's a niche genre. So most of them won't publish them, or will only publish like the the big hitters. Let's say, for example, I think that the only Chinese sci-fi book that's been completely translated is the trilogy of Cixin Liu, and a couple more books of him right now that were just published. But I think Spanish language has a lot to learn from English, the English publishing scene. Let's say, because there's a lot of diversity, even if it's harder to find. But speaking from South America, it's really hard to find different languages. For example, well, I started Vestigio because we were only finding, I don't know, Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury in our market. So trying to the idea, and I think that it's something that's beginning to happen, is that there are a lot of small presses that are trying to reach different languages and trying to bring and trying to learn what's in different languages. I will say that I've been really curious because I read a couple books that blew my mind of French weird fiction authors and fantasy authors, and I really love finding way more of them, especially because there's like a whole, I don't know, a whole movement that's related to the weird fiction and trying to mix, well, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and adventure, which I really love. Like it's the genre that both me and Rodrigo try to publish the most. But yeah, for example, even Italian, I've read a couple books from Italian authors, but they're grossly underrepresented in Spanish. So I think that I'd really love, for example, yeah, even Romance languages, I think that need to be way more represented in, well, at least in the Colombian publishing scene.
Yeah, talking about Latin America, I think even when we talk about like Spanish and Portuguese and maybe French from the Caribbean, we don't get a lot of diversity, at least in Brazil. Like we get the classics like Gabriel Garcia Marques, Isabel Allende, and that's it. You know, like you don't get contemporary writers, and we become isolated from each other, right? If I can't read, if I don't have access to Colombian literature, science fiction from Chile, from Mexico, from anywhere else, like we get distance from each other, even though we are technically close, right? We share a little bit of the same flavor, maybe, although there are huge and vast differences. And I think that's very detrimental to creating and writing fiction in general, because you get stuck. You get stuck with stuff that was written 30, 40, 50 years ago. You don't read new stuff, you don't read new authors, and you think that stuff from 50 years ago is the thing that's, I don't know, brand new or contemporary. When it's classics, okay, fair, but there's different stuff being written, like weird fiction, like Diego mentioned. It's very, 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 very unknown in Brazil, you know, so it's hard. I would like to read more from more writers, contemporary writers from South America, from Latin America in general. I would love to read more Southeast Asian literature, East Asian literature. I'm going through a little bit of a phase, so there is that. And really anything different. Give me something, you know. and in Portuguese. Give me not only in English, but in Portuguese, something that I can share with my friends and not be like, well, I read this stuff and I can't talk about, I can't recommend to anyone because they don't read in English. That's how I started translating fan fiction, because I wanted my friends to read that. I wanted to have someone to talk about, you know.
Sure, sure, I know. Chiara, do you want to add?
Yeah, to be honest, I remember I was in China a couple of years ago, and there were some panels about Korean science fiction, and to be honest, I really would like to know more about it. So we know right now. Chinese science fiction is really popular, and we loved it. We love it, but as Iana said, from other parts of Asia, reading something from other parts of Asia, I think would be really interesting. And since I know interesting things have been written in Korea, I would really love to read, to know something more about it.
Yeah, me too. Emily, do you want to add something about this topic?
Yeah, I think everyone else really gave like very elaborate and elegant speeches about what they want to see. And I think just to pull this all together, I guess the trend that I've also been noticing is that it's not only that we have to look outside of the mainstream languages, but in a way, I think I know that Francesco posted this edition of FutureCon is called Decolonize the Future, but also in a way, I feel like the entire genre of science fiction itself should also be decolonized. Because the way we define science fiction right now, I've been noticing this throughout our conversation, is that it is very narrow, and that a lot of people, also in my home country, when they speak of science fiction, it's still very much shaped by what they've grown up reading, the classic Asimov, the kind of golden age English science fiction in general, and that's been their entire understanding of what this genre is supposed to be. Spaceships and facts, and that's what we call hard science fiction, quote unquote. Then I guess in country, we don't really have specific terms that are already widely used on the market for promoting fiction that's also under the general science fiction family, but does not fit into that kind of category. And as a result, I feel like forming these small enclosed communities, determining what science fiction should be, is also limiting the way that science fiction is being translated in and out of China. So, for example, I know that Diego mentioned the weird, and I know that in a lot of countries, the way they write fiction, it can include a lot of fantastical or futuristic elements, but the stories themselves don't necessarily fall under what we know as science fiction. And I know that Chiara mentioned Han Song, which is a writer who embraces so many techniques of the surreal, the grotesque, and he's also not what you would say a classic hard science fiction writer per se. So I guess like these are the people, these are the underrepresented authors or smaller subgenres or just cultural trends that generally fall through the cracks, at least in my understanding of what the Chinese market is like. So, oh my God. Thank you, Francesco. I am flattered.
Agreed.
Thanks, Francesco. Well, now it's time for our closing remarks. And before it goes, I would like to thank you very much, the Chilean Science Fiction and Fantasy Literature Association, for all the help they gave us. JP, who is here with us in the backstage. Well, now you could like make book announcements, invite people to read the magazines, and for the questions that are still in our chat, I would encourage you to put them in our Discord channel. There is like the general chat. You could put them and let's discuss this for, I don't know, another time, and don't lose this connection we are building already. So we can go like by the alphabetical order for pronoun from names. Like we go Chiara, Diego, Emily, Iana, and then Rachel for the final remarks. Okay.
So as for final remarks, I don't have any special book announcements to make, but I can tell our Italian reader that we did publish actually an anthology collecting some of Hanson's short stories. So who is willing to read something really interesting about from him, although it's not a novel yet, but it's possible to do that. And thank you everyone for the amazing speeches and the company, and it has been a great honor, and I leave the floor to my co-panelist Diego.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to everyone. I'm really humbled by speaking here with you guys. It's amazing. But yeah, let's see about announcements. Well, we are at Vestigio. We have been working around 3 years now, 3.5 years, publishing weird fiction, bizarre fiction. Right now, as I'm like learning more and more of Brazilian sci-fi, we are trying to. We'll start hopefully next year or at the end of this year publishing as one book from a weird author precisely, and then we'll try to expand upon it. But yeah, thank you so much. I really loved like being able to hear your viewpoints on these topics, and I've got like a lot of different recommendations to read through and to learn about, which is wonderful, really.
Yes. Thank you everyone for the invitation, for the talk. I am leaving here with a lot to read, so let's see how that goes. I have a short story that hopefully will be translated. It's a little weird fiction thing that I wrote in Portuguese that still doesn't have like a date to come out, so you can follow me on Twitter to check it out. I am Iana TXT on Twitter. And well, ETA Magazine will be publishing issue number 2 on November. So it's going to be bilingual, so you can read it in English and you can read it in Portuguese. It's going to have a lot of awesome stuff, from science fiction to stuff that's really hard to pin. And yeah, I think that's it. Let's keep translating and uniting as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It is a great honor for me to be here, and I definitely harvested so much recs and knowledge and general love from my fellow panelists, and today has been just a very great, rewarding kind of night for me. And I do have 2 announcements, actually. I have 2 major projects coming out, one in the fall and one next spring. So the first one, the title is AI 2041, 10 Visions for Our Future by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who was the former president, Google China, and Chen Xiufan, who is a very widely known Chinese science fiction writer. So they co-wrote this book. And in the book, it basically includes 10 short stories. I translated, I think, half or over half, I don't remember. But it depicts 10 different kinds of futures set in 10 different cities around the world. So it's a very global book in its own right, about how AI is going to kind of impact our lives. It's kind of tech plus science fiction. So it's an interesting combination. Check that out. And the other project is kind of like my own baby. The title is The Way Spring Arrives and Other Stories, edited by Yu Chen and Regina Kangyu Wang. So it's a collaboration between Tor and Storycom, which is a China-based writers agency company who's been working on the forefront of Chinese to English science fiction translations. And this anthology is really cool because it features a whole crew of female and non-binary creators, editors, translators, writers. Everyone in this cast are all just female and non-binary. And that's kind of the way we are trying to put ourselves out there, that Chinese science fiction isn't all about big names, which are men. So I think these two projects will be cool. Both are cool in their own right. And hang on, I'm just gonna type the names, and yeah, follow me on Twitter. I'll be posting ads.
First, I want to say I'm really sorry I was so late. Google lied to me. I typed in Santiago time and Chicago time, and it told me 11, so whatever. Anyway, sorry. So I just wanted to say I'm so happy to be with all of you. It's fabulous and fun talking translation and speculative fiction around the world. I would tell everyone to go to sfandtranslation.com, where there's always like, what's coming out, and, it's all what's coming into English, what to read, reviews, and sometimes some original fiction. Also, my, as I mentioned before, my book, Out of This World, Speculative Fiction and Translation from the Cold War to the New Millennium, is coming out from Illinois, University of Illinois Press, at the end of the year. And also a plug for the collection of stories by Clelia Faris that I translated along with Jennifer Dallaire, called Creative Surgery. And it's a mix of kind of weird sci-fi, sometimes fantastical stories. She has such a fabulous voice. Clelia is the best. And that's out from Rosarian Publishing, came out last year. So yeah, thank you to everyone.
We thank you so much. So thank you very much for such a good panel. You are gods, like Tiago was saying about Ursula Le Guin's forest is the word for worst forest. And thank you so much. And if you are watching us, stay for the next panel, because we are going to discuss magazines, and they are doing amazing things in the science fiction field. Okay, so gente, tchau, tchau, muito obrigada, thank you very much.
Tchau.
Ciao.
Muchas
Ciao.
gracias.
Obrigada.
Grazie, ciao.
William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes, and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.